Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, and I help provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate, as Basil would say, about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I do that through identifying the problem and coming up with practical solutions. I am a cybersecurity and business attorney.
And this episode is brought to you by our dog, Basil, and also Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, and professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. And today, I'm so excited that we have Corey Cutter joining us today. So Corey, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So for those who might not have met Corey before, Corey serves as the Senior Privacy Counsel for the American Cancer Society and is their sole advisor for all privacy-related matters. She received her undergraduate degree from Indiana University and earned her JD from the University of Colorado School of Law. Oh, Colorado, your favorite. She holds several privacy certifications from the IAPP. So welcome again, Corey, to the show.
Thanks.
We could just talk about Colorado all day.
Can we just talk about Boulder now?
I know, you just want to talk about Colorado and drones and the dog. Your favorites. Yeah. All your favorites. We could talk about the lipstick that showed up at the beginning because we're on video. And for anyone who doesn't know, Zoom has this really cool lipstick feature that I might have had still on. I think it looked great on you. It was a really nice deep purple.
Okay. Well, just remember, if we're going to do that, then the little drone may be outside your window taking some video.
Oh, that's fine. All good. All right. Back to the regular program. Back to our regular scheduled program. You can kick us off?
I am. And Corey, it's welcome. It's great to have you. And we'd love to know, give us a little background. How did you get started in your career and end up where you are today?
It's been a long journey, but my privacy background really started in litigation. I used to do work for one of the large consumer reporting agencies. So the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA, that really got me started with consumer rights. And that led me down the path into privacy. And I actually think I've told this to Jody before, but when we first met. But I think for me, I got started in privacy. I started learning about it. I went to my first IAPP convention, and I realized that there were other nerds like me who really liked privacy and were excited. And I describe privacy kind of like being a Trekkie from Star Trek. While that's not my preference, they have their own world and they're all excited by it all the time. And that's what they want to talk about all the time. And that's how privacy people are, I think, as well. So I found my world in privacy and just kind of grew from there.
Hey, that makes a lot of sense because you're kind of the security side to privacy and you want to talk about it all the time. But you found your community.
Yes, but I have an interesting question following up with that, Corey, so I am by training an M&A and a deal lawyer. And I work on cases, and one of my colleagues has a litigation background. And so it's a very different perspective. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the audience about how your background in litigation informs your perspective on privacy and compliance. I've found that it can be very different than someone like myself who's a deal lawyer. And it's just interesting.
Well, I think as a litigator, you only see things when they've blown up, right? And so I think I look at things from what is the worst thing that could happen, and I back out of it from there in terms of how I can advise a client or in my case in-house, which business group I'm looking at. And I say back away from there because if I only gave advice for the worst case scenario, they would never listen to me at all. So I have to find that balance. But I do find that litigators in general, you learn a lot, but you see the worst cases all the time, and that's what's constantly put in front of you. You rarely see, oh, that went smoothly, because you wouldn't be litigating.
On that notion, nonprofits have a lot of competing priorities to manage. So I'd love to hear how you're able to manage the privacy and security risks, in that type of an environment. So if you could share a little bit, I think that would be really interesting to our audience.
Yeah, I don't think that there's that much difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit in terms of the balance, because we all approach it from a level of risk and what level of risk we're willing to assume. The difference is, in the nonprofit world, people are trying to do good. And it is sometimes hard to convince people that their end goal doesn't justify the means, and that they have to consider other things along that path. Even though what they want to do is amazing, they still have to balance risk as well as consumer viewpoints and things that the donor or the constituent want to protect in the interim.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, Corey, because I represent some municipalities. One of the challenges we face is part of our goal is the public good, but we also have a limited budget. And in a way, nonprofits have the same challenge, where you have certain expenses you have to do and you're trying to do good. And so then how do you balance the allocation of your resources when people don't always appreciate the importance of your role in privacy?
That's a very good question. I think the reality is we lose out on a lot of the fun tools and technology that can assist with our responsibilities. And I have to focus a lot more on really getting people to understand the purpose behind it, so that policies and processes are adopted from people, because there are obviously limited funds, and you don't want to be spending all your money on privacy and security when your mission is to try to eliminate cancer from the world. So there is a balance, but I think that by teaching people really why it's important for them and why it can help engage more donors or make volunteers feel more comfortable giving us information, that's an easier way to go about achieving that goal.
I think there's a lot of nonprofits that could benefit from how you've been able to translate that in your organization. And if you could share a little bit maybe about what are some of those benefits, because I think there's a lot who say, oh, but that's just a risk. Who's going to bother me? I'm a nonprofit. I mean, right. I do good. No one's going to come and attack me. But we all know, as privacy and security professionals, actually you're a treasure trove. You probably might not have strong privacy and security protocols in place, and that makes it easy and a fabulous target. If you could share what have been some of the success stories, or what have been some of the points you've used to help bring people together in the company to adopt some policies and procedures.
Sure. So I think, ironically, using analogies that are outside of your goal, your mission for the nonprofit is helpful. And a lot of these, I will frankly say that I will steal from other presentations that I hear. I tell people I've stolen them, but they're very good. And there are a couple. One that we use in our privacy training that I've stolen is that
borrowed. You haven't stolen it; you've just borrowed it.
I do say that it's
forward,
not mine. Right? Passing it forward.
Yeah, I like that. A lawyer.
Only the technical people, because I didn't actually sit for an exam. But you tell me every day.
Okay, so borrowed. One of the ones that I have borrowed is talking about the fact that how casinos use poker. They use chips, right, instead of money, because they found that people were less attached to a chip than they were with an actual dollar bill. And that data is like that. That if you consider your database as just poker chips, then you're much more willing to give it up and share it with whoever and not protect it, because it doesn't mean as much to you. But you have to remember that behind each of those poker chips is the dollar, or behind each of those poker chips is the person. And the other example that I use that I think helps people put things in perspective is when you think about all the data that's at the grocery store that they will keep about you, right? And it's fine for most people if they get an ad for a coupon for something that they buy on a regular basis. But if you walk into the grocery store and there's, a sign for Metamucil that comes up that says, "Hey, Corey, you're in the grocery store. Do you want to buy the Metamucil?" You might be a little more sensitive to the fact that the grocery store is keeping that information from you. And that's the same kind of thing when you talk about with American Cancer Society. For a lot of people, we do have their cancer information. And I don't mean the research piece, because that's a whole different arena. But cancer, while they might stand up at an ACS event and be super excited to share the fact that they are a cancer survivor, that might not be something that they're willing to share in everyday life. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that the context matters when we're keeping that information. And we have to be respectful that we can only use it in the context that they give it to us. So that's I found to be helpful.
Those are fabulous analogies. I often use kind of I like the chip analogy a lot.
I'm going to be stealing that from you.
Yeah, I like the chip one. I've always
We'll have
talked
to find
about
out whose it was.
Yeah, you're borrowed, remember? I've always referenced
Thank you, counselor.
The idea of people, right? We're talking to humans and people, and sometimes people are always focused on the number of emails I have, or the number of sales, or the number of contacts, or the number of leads. But it's a human that you're trying to connect with. And when you think about them as humans, it changes people's perspective a little bit. So I really like the chip piece. And you're absolutely right. You have some really sensitive information. And that's true in a variety of different organizations, nonprofit and profit. So thank you so much for sharing that story. I really think that will help resonate with people, why it's so important to understand. Again, it's the human that's at the other side, and it's not just random data.
Absolutely.
Wow. That was profound what you just.
Well, I try every now and again.
Yes.
I have to keep up with you.
Okay. Well, let's delve in a little bit more technically. Now, Corey, as you are well aware, we're seeing a expansion of privacy laws all around the country. We have California, Virginia, they're looking at Oklahoma, Florida. Every day we have a new privacy law. I go, yay for red Clover. But from your perspective, how does this changing regulatory landscape impact the nonprofit world and how you go about navigating it? Because with what you do, you have a national database of interested people.
Yeah, so that's actually very interesting, because there are two issues there, and one of it is how, in general, does a nonprofit or a national organization keep up with the changing laws, which is challenging in and of itself. What I find interesting is obviously not all of those laws apply to nonprofits. Some of those laws specifically will carve out nonprofits. Some of it, nonprofits can be kind of brought in as a third party, and it still creates an issue. We do get a chance to absorb the new laws on an easier pace, I guess, than a for-profit company, because I will often advise the organization that if a law is in place and consumers are used to it with for-profit, we need to consider whether that's something that we as a nonprofit just want to give them anyway, because it's an expected right or a expected benefit that they already have. And so there's a balance there. I'll look at a law that says, well, this doesn't technically apply. We're safe from that. But what do our donors think? What will our volunteers expect? And how do we respect what the community at large thinks is going to happen when they interact with us? But I will say the fact that some laws don't apply is actually helpful at times. I'll see a new law. Virginia was coming down the pike. I'm watching it, but it didn't include nonprofits. So I could kind of go, okay, that's one thing I don't have to deal with right now. But Washington State specifically does include nonprofits, and the New York law, while it doesn't specifically include it, their technology law, does include the security law does include nonprofits. So there's an indication that nonprofits will be included in that. So it's a balance of watching what the consumer wants and expects, as well as trying to look a few steps down the road, because since we have the monetary problem that we don't have excessive money to spend to start dealing with compliance, the sooner we can start adopting some of these laws, the more likely it is that once they come into effect and actually include us, that we'll be ready to go.
Because it seems like a really interesting point that you're making is, even if you technically don't have to comply with the privacy law because it doesn't apply to you, it's almost like these laws are creating a new norm of expectation with consumers. And as a lawyer, you have to think about the implications of the business relationship that should be driving how you want to interact with your customers as opposed to a simple or more strict legal interpretation. It sounds like that's really one of the ramifications of this proliferation of these privacy laws.
That's exactly right. You certainly said that in a more concise and clear way than I was trying to express it, but I think that that's exactly right.
Well, don't worry. My wife says I'm wordy far too often. So this was a momentary lapse into brilliance, and it won't last long.
I won't hold you to it.
Yeah, he has been known to repeat things 3 times in 5 minutes, but that's a different conversation. What would you say are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now?
The biggest challenges is a lot of the new privacy laws that are coming down the pike really do require technical solutions to be fully compliant. And that's something we may or may not have budget for, depending on what it is. So that, in the scheme of things, even when you look at risk, there are things that we have to weigh that risk. Is it worth donor dollars here to be fully compliant? And I often will, when I'm advising, will take a look at what are the things that we can do that the consumer will expect, that the donor will expect, that the volunteer will expect, that don't cost us anything. So if someone calls us up and says they want us to delete their information, and that particular record doesn't have a legal reason to maintain it, then we delete the information. Or that's my advice in any event, because at least from our main system, because if a donor doesn't want to interact with us, they're not likely to be someone that we're going to get a lot of money from going forward. If a volunteer doesn't want to interact with us, that's not likely someone who's going to be spending a lot of time and effort to assist in our mission. So understanding that we can respect what someone might want, and that's not something that costs us a lot of money on the front end to say, we'll take it out of our CRM in the database. Having said that, a lot of the deletion laws, really do require you to get down in the nitty gritty and get someone's name out of an email if there's not a valid reason not to, and pull it out of an Excel file that's in somebody's C drive. And those are things that we don't have the ability to do. So we try to go with the spirit of the law as well as the spirit of what someone might want. But that's a challenge because it's a pick and choose type of approach.
Right. And I think kind of tying all of this together, if a donor comes to you and says, I want to be removed from your database, and you honor that, potentially down the line, they might change their mind. They might have someone that's impacted by cancer. Now they realize, what, goodness, I really actually want to donate again. And now they've kind of come back. Whereas if you had potentially said, sorry, no, we don't have to, the law says nonprofits are excluded. See right here, we don't have to do that. And you take that approach, now they're going to be mad and they're going to have kind of a distaste in their mouth for the organization. But actually by honoring and listening in those areas where you can, and you do the best job that you can, I think you're actually really helping to create a long-term relationship, even if in the short term, there isn't a relationship. Because I bet some of those people would come back. It would be a fascinating, maybe some technology to do that, but a fascinating ability to kind of track that, to see, these people delete and then they came back, which I guess is a whole different privacy thing. But you do have to have a log. And so you're allowed to track that part. For anyone listening, they might be like, that's an oxymoron. No, you have to have a log.
No, I think that's a very good point. And I think that is the underlying reason why I'm giving the advice that I give, because, and that's the same in the for-profit world, right? You try to use privacy to improve your brand with the public. And the same thing would be true here, is that if someone is asking us to do something and we don't need to maintain it for whatever reason, then we want to respect what they're looking for. Just because that does engender people to want to spend more time with you or your cause, as opposed to, that person that then wants to post on social media that, this organization keeps harassing me. I told them no, and they keep coming back, versus this organization respected me. It's either positive media or the silent media as opposed to the negative one.
Exactly. The dog collar agrees.
There he is. So I guess, Corey, changing topics just slightly is, from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about, the impact on a nonprofit if you are in a situation where you have a data breach or a failure to comply with privacy laws. It seems to me what's really at issue is obviously there's the financial component, but then there's the reputational issue because people are trying to do good and they may have certain expectations. Is there thoughts that you can share with us around that?
You mean the donors have expectations? Is that what you're asking?
I would think the donors and the survivors and the very, this is a very sensitive and, visceral type of topic for people involved.
Certainly, and it would also depend, obviously, on the type of data breach and what data was at issue and what was disclosed. This I think became this was actually not an issue for ACS because our personal information wasn't affected, but the Blackbaud breach that occurred, this past year was massive, absolutely massive. Thousands of nonprofits were in fact affected, and you saw them. There were people coming together trying to say, well, are you guys going to let people know? And we don't have a legal requirement to disclose. And what are you going to do? And how are you handling this? So all of those things did come out because for nonprofits, as you intimated with the question, trust is essential to that relationship with a nonprofit because there are lots of them and people have limited funds and limited time that they're going to expend. And so that trust factor is huge, and doing what your constituency would expect when something like that happens and respecting them in the greatest way possible is in fact something that you have to jump on almost immediately. Luckily for us, we were not impacted with that one and didn't have to make those hard decisions. But you saw a lot of notices going out for people that didn't have a legal requirement to notify. So that was
we got
based on that
ourselves.
Well, and Corey, I'm going to bring up this point, and if you're able to chime in, great. But one of the biggest challenges that I face when I do the ransomware part of my practice is how do you balance the legal requirements versus trying to do what's right for the customer? It is a really difficult needle to thread.
It is, and I think all of that's going to be, factually based. Of course, the good lawyer answer. It depends, but it really does depend. When we looked at Blackbaud, we had some people that would call in and ask, and we gave our call center instructions on what they could, to explain to people that our personal data wasn't affected because we wanted to be able to handle that portion, but we didn't want to alert 10 million people that in fact their data wasn't at issue in an incident. So there's the practical balance as well as the logical one. You don't want to inflame an issue to do the right thing, right? But you want to be prepared to inform people that inquire. And if our analysis might have been different if it were just that it didn't trigger requirements, but it was still everybody's name and phone number or something like that. We might have had a different approach, but it's a balance, and it really depends on where you sit and what's the impact and how massive is it, all of those fun things. And so I don't think that's different for any situation. Obviously, legal compliance is legal compliance, but I don't think otherwise any breach is any different. You do the same analysis every time.
Couldn't tell if you were going to ask more questions. I can tell you're so excited on this topic.
Yeah, it's one of the toughest things that I grapple with is the legal part versus informing your customers. And there is an art to how to do that. And then if you're business people who've never dealt with a breach, you have to make very difficult decisions with incomplete facts, with an incomplete forensic investigation, with customers who are all over you to find things out. Because if you're silent, that is immediately interpreted as negative. But at the same time, you're still getting the facts straight. And to go out with facts that may not be complete, that you have to retract, how many times have we seen that in the news? And I just appreciate your perspective, Corey, because from my vantage point on those types of engagements, it's really tough. And you really have to develop a really fine sense of judgment.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. But I just think that doesn't change every time. That's going to be the case, right? In every incident you have, you've got to do that balance. You have to consider your basically your reputation, both at large and with the immediate customer base or donor base or volunteer base. You want to respect them and then figure out the best way to inform that group of people,
but I think
whether they've been affected or not.
But I would say this is where you may not be giving yourself enough credit, because I've seen plenty of situations where we had a vendor get hit that impacted us. And the way the vendor handled the communication and everything, I was thinking, what are you guys thinking about your relationship with your customers? You've clearly circled the wagons and want to ride out the legal storm at the cost of your reputation and customer relations. And so listening to you, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, it is not always the commonplace view and common sense approach that wins out when you put people in a very emotional, challenging, they're exhausted situation. So kudos that you're able to really understand and discern that.
Thank you. I'll be sure to pass that along to my boss.
Well, we've talked a lot about tips that nonprofits and for-profit organizations can take to help make sure that they're following either privacy laws or just customer expectations. What would you say is your best personal privacy tip that you would offer people?
Yeah. So my personal privacy tip, frankly, other than, reading the newspaper, privacy is now a big deal and breaches get covered a lot more with much more frequency than they used to, is to use some sort of monitoring service for your information that monitors the dark web. I use an app called Jumbo. I'm not pushing for that or not pushing for that. They actually have a free version and a paid version, but it will alert you if something happens, So, okay, I got an email the other day, or notice the other day that my phone number had been leaked and was sold on the dark web. And so anything that I use that for two-factor authentication, I can then consider whether that's something I need to change or not. So it just keeps me on top of things before it becomes an issue. That particular app is also helpful because it will, if you link it with, some of the social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, it will ask you if you want to go back and delete old conversations so that they're not just sitting there and potentially getting exposed if there later is a breach. It will remove searches or cookies that you don't want on there. And it kind of does that on a regular basis automatically. So it kind of is cyber hygiene that you don't have to do on your own. And I find that helpful. Yeah,
that's a great tip. Thank you. I had shared I hadn't heard of that one before, so I'm excited to check that one. I know you're going to be right on top of that.
I know that. Exactly right.
Well, when you're not in the office and not studying and reading about privacy breaches, what do you like to do for fun?
I'm going to be frank. I am a homebody to the ultimate extent, but my dog is my life. I absolutely love going on walks with the dog and hanging out in the park. And that's my excuse for activity. And it's my excuse to stay home all in one. So,
well, what kind of dog?
It is a lab mix. She's a rescue and I've had her for a decade and she's awesome. Unfortunately, Jenny, she hates people. So whatever she's mixed with is not, she loves me, and very few people in my life, but maybe I'm just gonna say she's a private dog. I know, corny.
That's all good. Now, if people would like to learn more about you and the great work that you're doing at the American Cancer Society, where can they find you?
Well, for me, you can find me at the American Cancer Society, which is just my email at the American Cancer Society, Corey.Cutter@cancer.org. But the American Cancer Society, go to cancer.org and look at all the amazing things that they provide to people, services they provide, rides they provide, housing that they help with, and consider whether that's a charity that they want to support.
Well, wonderful. Thank you.
It's been great to have you.
Thanks so much for your time today.
Absolutely. We appreciate all of the fabulous tips that you provided. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.